Hey everyone, welcome to More Than Numbers Live, a data show focused on turning data teams from a support function into engines of growth. I'm Ollie Hughes. I'm one of the co-founders of Count.co, a canvas-based BI tool. We love turning data teams from being dashboard factories into their organizations' problem solvers. Every week, I have the joy of interviewing an industry leader to understand how they're drawing value from data in their organization. And this week, I'm joined by Conor O'Kane. Conor is the head of analytics at Cleo. Cleo is an AI-based money assistant. It's one of the fastest growing startups in the UK, tipped to be one of Forbes' next billion-dollar startups. And Conor has been there for over 5 years. He's been there since the company was 30 people, leading and growing the analytics organization pretty much from scratch. Conor, it's great to have you here. You're going to be helping us understand how data works at Cleo and how it's a driving force of change. Thank you so much.
Great to be here. Happy to come on and talk about data teams. I think we've got a great one. So.
Yeah, you do. You definitely do.
Any wisdom we can impart.
I should say to all the audience that Conor, I have a fondness for Conor and the team at Cleo because they're one of the earliest companies to lean in heavily with Count, and we haven't been more grateful to them before. And so, yeah, I have a lot of love for this team. I wanted to get you on as one of my earliest guests. And Conor, before we get to know you a bit more, I want to ask you an icebreaker question. I want to know, what was the first BI tool that you used other than Excel when you started out your data career? It's a great way to get a sense of how old you are, really, to be honest.
Yeah, you're taking me right back to the days of being a junior analyst. Yeah, a bit of a trip down memory lane, this one. I think my first foray into what you might call a classic BI tool was with ClickSense. I don't know if you know it.
ClickSense. Well, yes, it was Click and there was ClickSense. Maybe they still exist. I don't even know.
And then ClickSense, yeah.
ClickSense.
A classic enterprise dashboarding tool. So I was working at a large IT consultancy, working for enterprise clients, building databases and then dashboarding suites on top. And it was our tool of choice that we used for those. It was one of those delight to consume and absolute pain to develop in. So its USP was this associative data model. So under the hood, it linked all the categories. And it did a really, really nice job of surfacing them in this standard color scheme of green, white, gray. So green being what was selected, white being like the possible values that remain after your selections, and gray being those that were excluded. And it was really set up for drill down and drill through. And it was a really useful tool for people for doing, descriptive analysis, some basic diagnostics. But it was a real pain to work in. It had this clunky domain-specific language. You had to develop locally. You had to publish it to a server. You had scheduled reloads. Access was really, really locked down. And I guess it really goes against the grain of what you've got in the modern data stack, where data democratization and permissiveness is sort of what is optimized for. So yeah. If I look back and think about what it was like and whether I'd ever use a tool like that again, I think 100% it just wouldn't work for the kind of company that Cleo is, because it is so slow to develop in. I think it's something that is often underappreciated in analytics, is the importance of speed. Speed is like the great multiplier. The more questions you can ask, the more answers you get. And the more answers you get, the more likely you are to get to an answer that is going to give you the answer you need, that is going to be that thing that pushes you forward. So any tool, no matter how good the end output is, if it's slow to develop, and it's not going to be something that works.
You know what? I love asking this question because it was clear in the way you answered it that you have a special fondness for that tool because it's the first thing you really digging in, right? But you stand on the shoulders of giants. At the time, it was amazing and it gave you that flexibility. But yeah, it's not right for now. And I think that's what we acknowledge.
Beautiful dashboards that people loved using. But if it takes 3 days to do it, it's the time is better spent elsewhere.
I also I love the idea that it had the color scheme was like green, like basically the Click color scheme. Yeah. I'm not sure we get away with that account having only our brand colors, partly because it's pretty bold pink and blue. I'm not sure we could get away with only having the color schemes for very long. We need to have more. Things have evolved in terms of people's requirements now as well. That's a great start. So that's where you started. Let's talk about where you are at Cleo now. Cleo is a wonderful organization. You actually serve primarily the US market, but the whole team, I think, is pretty much based in the UK. Very dynamic. Maybe you could just paint a bit about the org, how big it is, maybe how fast it's growing, and then let's talk about the data stack, the data team, I think people want to know really like how data's set up for you, but maybe start high level and we can work down into more of your org.
So we've got a pretty sizable data team at Cleo. So the whole company's 300 people and the data org is about 60, of which you can broadly break that down into data science, data engineering, and analytics. So analytics is a team that sits under my brief. So we've got product analysts and analytics engineers. So the product analysts are the sort of the Swiss Army knife, the people who are there working very, very closely to the teams, helping the teams move faster, make better decisions, understand what to be built, what success looks like, how they are tracking towards success, where the opportunities are. And the analytic engineers are, everyone's best friend, sitting one step higher up in the data stack, building the amazing data models that organize the knowledge that allow us to ask those kind of questions and find those answers. In total, that analytics team is 35. So it's quite a sizable team. I think it speaks to the extent to which Cleo values data as just like part of our ways of working.
20%, 10% is analytics, and then you've got a wider 20% of the function of the company is data as a whole. It's a pretty big ratio, actually, isn't it? I think that's pretty unusual.
But of course, machine learning and AI sits under the hood of a lot of the product that is served. So as well as analytics in the more operational function of the company, we invest heavily in machine learning engineering as actually part of the product that is served to the users.
Sure. That's good. We'll come back to there's a lot I want to talk about, having had a bit of an insight to how you work, about exactly the way that your team, particularly the analytics team, actually work with the rest of the business. But let's talk about your data stack first. Just ground people and a bit about what you're using and how it's set up.
It's a reasonably classic data stack, cloud data warehouse, DBT doing the transformation with Fivetran as our ingestion tool, and then a split of tools in the consumption layer. So we've got Fivetran, Redshift, DBT transforming back from and back into Redshift, and then in the consumption layer, Mode as our primary dashboarding tool, Count as our data exploration, data analysis tool, and then Growthbook as a specialist A/B testing BI tool for really for like self-serve analytics on that end.
Yeah, so it's pretty standard stack. It's obviously very much the classic modern data stack. I wanted I've obviously got vested interest in this, but despite my interest, how do you see that stack evolving? What's the thing which you're most, as a team, you're most excited by, or you think you've got what you need? Do you see any? There's a lot of discussion nowadays about consolidation, but I actually wonder how much you really care about consolidation rather than having the right tools for the right job.
Yeah, certainly. What we're optimizing towards is speed. I think in all of those choices, we're thinking about the things that help us move fast, and it's fast in different ways. So Mode, if you compare it to all of the different dashboarding tools that exist out there, its USP is in its speed, essentially in its speed of filtering, its speed of how you can go through and play around with the dashboards. And really that's because it's leveraging memory during query execution. Someone once said to me, when we were working through different dashboarding tools with different stakeholders in the business, someone said to me, if it doesn't load in 3 seconds, then it doesn't load. If it doesn't work that quickly, then it doesn't work at all. And that really resonated with me, and that sort of speaks to the mindset that we have as a company. I know Count do something very similar with the DuckDB integration that you have. So then Count is probably the tool that we use the most. It's very much the go-to sandbox, really, of our analysts. It's just like the way that you can explore in a really, really fast, non-linear sense, that sort of seamless integration of SQL and Python, the multi-spatial nature of it. It just sort of lends itself to the analytic mindset. And really, that's where day-to-day the analysts live. And then Growthbook is just something that has been built as a niche tool for a Bayesian framework A/B testing. And it really works for us out of the box. It really just reduces a lot of the overhead to producing the analysis to an extent where the engineers can do a lot of the setup and the analysis themselves. So that's really why we have those. In terms of consolidation, I'm there's a lot of debate in the industry about whether the explosion of the number of data tools was a product of the ZERP era, loose VC explosion.
You've got a relatively bounded data stack, to be fair. Like, there's a lot of companies out there with a lot of middleware. Like, there's a lot of observability stuff sitting in the middle of that stack, which is just all over the place. So you're actually not too bad anyway.
Recently, we steered away from adding extra layers because, again, that's the kind of thing that slows you down. But I think there's a little bit of mental overhead of knowing what tool to jump to and from in order to find the answers. But I think you get used to that and you learn that quite quickly. So in terms of consolidation, it's not something that I expect to see too much of, because what you're then talking about is some very large all-purpose enterprise tool. But if it's able to do the things that we need it to do, if it's able to meet our niche needs, then it's probably going to be built to meet a whole host of other needs. And then that will be functionality that we'll be paying for that I think we don't really want to pay for. And then you just have like a slow, clunky enterprise tool that really you see very little improvement in from quarter to quarter. So it's not something that I see changing anytime soon. Of course, the great unknown is AI, right? There's a lot of talk that AI will become this all-purpose interface for answering all of your questions, and you won't necessarily need to have like the setup and the complicated user interfaces that we have today. I haven't seen that yet. I haven't seen an interface for AI that's super compelling yet. So
I think that's fair. I mean, I actually feel quite bullish about our Canvas interface because it's most flexible and it gives AI the most power to play. But I'm with you. It's an evolving space. The thing I'm most heard from you here is just about speed. Like, everything you're talking about, every decision you're making is speed focused. And I don't think that means, you mentioned as a query time, but actually, I think it sounds like it's more than just the speed of querying. It's the speed of decision. It's the speed of the ability to be able to act, which is the fundamental driver. And I wonder if that's a thing which is that kind of like one of the fundamental pillars of the way you think about your org structure and how analysts sit, because it is quite unique the way, as we'll go on to talk more about, the way that your analytics function sits with the organization is incredibly close. And I think is that all about speed as well? Is it just about that kind of speed to decision?
So our analytics function is embedded, or our product analysts are embedded. So the typical model would be to have one analyst sitting in a cross-functional squad that owns a certain part of the code base that is building certain user-facing features, and you have one analyst embedded in that team. Those teams will be grouped into pillars, and you'll have a lead analyst who operates across that pillar. So they'll be responsible for coordinating joined-up analytic efforts between everyone in the pillar. They'll be doing their own ecosystem analysis, and they'll be performance managing the individuals in the pillar. Our analytic engineers, they sit in a centralized team. So when the people often discuss the pros and the cons of embedded teams versus centralized teams, for me, it's really a simple case of knowledge share. It's the type of knowledge share that you need to optimize towards. So if you've got a centralized team, you have excellent knowledge share between individuals in the team. They all know what each other are working on. They're sort of absorbing from each other. It's much easier to learn from your peers in that environment because you really are sitting in a stand-up with them every morning, hearing them talk about what they're working on, maybe picking up some of the work that they had worked on previously. Whereas if you're embedded, you've got great knowledge share with actually what is happening on the ground, with the engineers, with the designers, with the product managers, the people who are like building the product that the users will use. And because of what we want the analytic role to be, which is very much a strategic one rather than an executional one, they really are responsible for uncovering opportunities that drive the company forward. It is paramount for those individuals to have the maximum knowledge share of what the business goals are, what performance looks like, what the user problems are, what that opportunity space is. So they are embedded into that space. So is it a question of speed? Perhaps not directly. It's more one of the sort of the deep product knowledge that they really need to understand in order to be able to actually work as a thought partner for the product manager, as someone who can really work closely with engineering and design and help them understand how they can build better and build faster.
I think if we obviously, Conor, you've been involved with that as we've been building out the tenets of a high impact data team. And I think a lot of what your analysts are doing in that cross-functional group is very much delivering those tenets. So the tenets being driving operational clarity, make sure everyone's clear exactly what the performance is, problem solving as like the structuring the problem solve, time to decision, helping collaborate and getting to a point of conviction, and then obviously just doing it in a measured way. I think what I've seen, I think the way your team does that is so great. And it's such a unique, one of the questions I wanted to ask was just about is how you've got to that point. Like, obviously you've grown the team from basically just pretty much you, I think, at start off with, or very few people, and now you've got a team of 30. And I just wondered, like, how have you instilled this idea that the data analyst, the product analyst role isn't tactical, it is strategic? How's that happened? Like, and how have you maintained that they're basically the kind of they're a core part of the squad of delivering product value?
So I think its origin probably sits in our CEO being a former data scientist. So that really, instilled a data-led culture into the company from its inception. And a lot of the early hires on the product side and the engineering side were all incredibly data literate. So it just became part and parcel in those early days when there were very few of us of how the company operated. In terms of then how do you maintain that over time as you bring in lots of new people, I think it is something you need to work very hard at. So we work really hard to build a skills framework for our analysts that really sits at the center of how we direct their work and also how we reward their work. And I think that's incredibly critical in analytics. It's critical in any function, but product analytics really is quite undeveloped as a discipline, which I guess is a surprise to me when it's been around now really for 10 or 15 years. But you'll see very little literature on what great product analytics look like, very few examples of great work. There are no conferences really that talk about analytics as a craft as opposed to tooling, very little in the way of meetups. So a lot of analysts come in and I don't think they necessarily understand straight off the bat what is expected of them. So we have to put a lot of work into that. So our skills framework that is publicly available.
I'm actually going to say, you shared me the link, and if you want to get access to that, and I would 100% recommend everyone looks at that skills framework. You can find it in the show notes. It's a really amazing document, and it just outlines a much broader role for an analyst than just simply being a kind of, it broadens that role wonderfully. Sorry to cut in.
No problem at all. Yeah, it's an incredibly valuable asset that we have, and we really try and put it at the center of career development and performance review. So when it comes to the performance review cycles, we're really judging people against the skills and the deliverables and the impact that is listed there. And then we're very regularly, every couple of months, doing check-ins with people, helping them understand where they are against their level. When we're talking about promotions, really sort of saying, like, this is where you are and this is what the next level looks like. This is where you're great. This is where you're less great. This is where you have to push on a little bit. Let's set some goals that help you get there.
And just progress. I mean, the thing about it, the simplest thing about it, it sounds so ridiculous when I say it, is like there is progression within the discipline. It is like product analysts can be incredibly highly valued, incredibly highly paid, and the path to get there is clear. It isn't nebulous, and I think that it makes it's of strategic value to the business rather than being the place you go before you become a data engineer. And that alone, just giving a path, is such a powerful thing.
There's a lot of ways that one can go with in the analytics role. And I think partly that's because of the nature of the individuals that tend to be attracted towards analytics. They are both technical and business minded. So they can go down those paths, and they can take a linear path within analytics. They look to become managers, leaders. They can stay as like really specialist ICs. They can look to become leaders in a certain domain function. So there's lots of ways that we can do that. But before you get there, you sort of have to hone your craft and go up through those skill levels. So having a document like that is important because it gives people those clarity of expectations, but also the right incentives, right? People follow incentives. So if you say to people, like, this is what you're going to be judged on, then very quickly you'll find that they start behaving that way, and that's kind of what we need from them as a company.
And what do you, and just to give you a flavor of what's in there, like what would you say in that framework is a skill or an aptitude which you find a new person who's been an analyst before somewhere else comes in and is like, oh, that's different. This role is definitely different to an analyst role I've had before. Like, can you give us a sense of like what is in the framework which is a core differentiator to like a normal analyst maybe before that you see coming in? Like you have to help them with that transition.
Yeah, I think it's that ask of our analysts to be someone who drives forward product decisions and helps uncover new opportunities. So there's lots of stuff in there in terms of the soft and the technical skills that you would expect of an analyst that I imagine are pretty boilerplate and pretty transferable across lots of companies. Mm-hmm. But often when people join Cleo, I'll often hear them say, oh, wow, I've never had analysts that work as closely with me as the analyst does now. I've never seen analysts that take this kind of a role before, where really they are thought partners for product, where they are given a lot of autonomy in terms of setting the work that they do and what they work on. So I'll often say to analysts when they first join, if the PM is turning to you and saying, this is what I want you to do, the relationship is not working. You're doing an okay job, but not a great one. It's you want the PM turning to you with the trust to say, hey, what is it you think we should do? And you coming back with ideas and the PM saying, brilliant, yes, let's do it. So it's really that. So with that autonomy comes responsibility. And that is to really be someone who makes a difference, who really gets in there and uncovers problems. When product analytics is done right, it's a super fun discipline. You're really getting in there and you're problem solving. It's finding that edge, right? It's like, what's that thing that we don't understand? What's that growth lever that we haven't uncovered? What's a list of ideas that we could break down in size and try and interrogate to see what can, push us forward towards the business goals and the user goals that we have. So when it's working well, it's a super exciting and a super rewarding and a super impactful discipline. So I think those are the things that are different in our progression framework, the extent to which those are called out at the top. This is where you have impact. This is expected of you. You're expected to be someone who is very influential in the direction of your team.
I think that's great. I mean, and the results speak for themselves, right? The speed at which Cleo is growing is amazing, and it's driven by the fact you've got that kind of relationship set up, that adding value. I can't tell people enough to go look at that progression framework. It's absolutely brilliant. Okay. I think there's so much more I want to touch on this. We got to come back to speak to another time, but there's more to discuss it. I'm so grateful for sharing some of that stuff already and actually making your framework for progression is that framework of skills is available on open source. You've made it something everyone can actually use, and I would encourage people to dig in. I'm going to move on now. I want to talk to you more about just some advice. So obviously you've been at Cleo for 5 years. You've been a management consultant in analytics and data before that. What's the one piece of advice you'd give to someone who is coming into data or is earlier on in their career than you? Like, what's the one thing that you would give yourself that advice to help them go faster? What's that one thing you wish you knew?
Yeah, it took me a little while to think about this one, because there's always a risk of being super reductionist in any of these kinds of bits of advice. But I think the single most important decision you can make is the kind of company you join, because from that flows everything else. So you can imagine putting together, the perfect personal development or learning plan for how you're going to upskill yourself towards, the desired career. Imagine spending your evenings and your weekends working on all of those things. If you get to a company and they're super forward thinking and they want to support your development and they say, hey, you can have 10% of your time to be working on these like alternative projects, it's still only 10% of your time. The most of the time that you will spend growing within your career is through the process of the job you actually do. So if you join a company where, there are loads of people that you will learn from, who you're working closely with and who know more than you in some direction, then you will be pushed and you will grow. Growing by working closely with other people who know more than you is just by a distant, the best way that you can learn. It's almost small M mentorship, right? It's not mentorship where you have a formalized mentor. It's just like being around people where just by osmosis, you kind of see what they're doing. You think, wow, I never thought to do that before. That's really amazing. I'm going to do it like that the next time. So, being in that kind of company where you're surrounded by people, that's super important.
If there's ever been an advert for joining Cleo, I think it was this one. Your HR department should be very grateful. There we go. And Cleo's hiring everyone, and you get to use Count. What more could you possibly want out of your analytics career?
Yeah, and just one more point I would make on that is growth. This is something that I've learned a lot in my career. I think when you're working in tech, it's very unlike someone who works in, a finance career or an accounting career, where there's almost a very defined growth path where every 2 years you move from junior associate to senior associate. In tech, it's a lot more like you just suddenly get these step jumps where you get thrown into the deep end and your career suddenly accelerates. And the single greatest way, other than your own talent and your own hard work, is being at a company that's growing. If you are at a company that's growing, the problems are changing all the time. The scale at which those problems are being applied is changing all the time. Suddenly the company is bigger, there is more responsibility, and by a virtue of having been there, that responsibility is thrust upon you, and whether you're ready for it or not, you will just grow by the process of having it. So joining a company that is growing and is going to serve you well in terms of your personal growth is so much more important than whether it's something you think you'll, enjoy in the very instance of today, or what the salary is. I often say to people, be long-term greedy. Yes, be selfish. Yes, be self-interested. But think about that in 5 years' time. What's going to be the company and what's going to be the role that just keeps you growing so that you're in that, super well-paid job in 5 years' time.
I love it. Thank you so much. Okay, we have time. We have 3 minutes left, and I'll make sure we get you to one more question. I actually told people I was speaking to you a few weeks ago, and they gave me a few questions I wanted to ask you about particularly, and I've got one here. It's anonymous, but here it is. A very simple question. What are the key results that Conor owns in Cleo, and how does he come up with them? We've got a 2-minute answer, Conor, if you can do it that quickly.
This is an interesting one. The short answer is not many. So as I spoke before, product analytics are thought partners for product. So their goals are our goals. We succeed and fail together. So the product analysts are embedded. So their goals individually is to succeed and fail with the team, hopefully to succeed. Certainly, I personally have a responsibility in owning our understanding of retention. So retention is kind of the everything metric. No one squad can ever be put in charge of retention. I've seen it done, and it's a complete folly, because everything ladders up into retention. Do your users love the product? Do they then stick around? So I'm responsible working with the leadership team for the understanding, the reporting for that, holding teams accountable against their subset of what we understand will ladder up to overall retention, setting actions that are passed down over to the squads. But I'm not myself or the analytics team isn't responsible per se for actually hitting that retention goal. It's an accumulation of the different squads that as a business we understand will ladder up to retention.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. This has been an amazing conversation. Thank you so much for being open and honest about where you are with Cleo. You've told us about the power of being embedded, the power of a career framework, and even just there talk about the way that you own targets and how you're accountable to delivery. It's been really great. Thank you so much, Conor, for being here. I hope it's been good fun for you. If Conor said the Cleo are hiring, you should definitely check them out. Check out the show notes at count.co/MTN for access to their progression framework if you can't find it online. Also check out count.co to look at more about what Count is about. Thank you so much, Conor. Really appreciate it. Speak to everyone soon.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.